If you didn't see my first video in this series, let me catch you up. Over the next couple months, I'm going to be creating my top 10 albums list. And my method of doing this is by making a list and then listening to 3 or 4 albums at a time and putting that up against what's already on the list to decide whether or not it deserves to kick stuff off and find its own place. In last week's video, I gave 10 albums from 9 of my favorite artists to create kind of the foundation of the list, but I didn't rank them. I have since re-listened to all of those, and I'm about to start ranking them now. No, wait. Now, number 10 on the list is Season 2 by Pomplamoose. Pomplamoose is a band that formed on YouTube with singer and bassist Nataly and all the instruments, Jack Conte, and they've reinvented themselves quite a bit. But when I think about this era of the band, which is when I came into them, I'm thinking of this expansive, playful, almost bespoke sound. The band mixes together covers and originals almost equally. There are 6 covers and 5 originals on here, and they are mostly staggered out. But despite the covers coming from just various different time periods and genres, and the originals being their own thing, this is all very aesthetically driven. I really think it is that playfulness that sells me on this album in particular. There's especially a lot of playfulness with the keys. There's a lot of different types of keys you get. You get electric piano, organ, toy piano, regular piano, synths, all sorts of stuff that kind of blend together to create this very piano-driven, key-driven sound that is then mixed together with all these other musical moments of experimentation with a kind of steady, dependable bass line that carries through all the songs. There's only one song on the album, The Internet Is Awesome, that I just can't vibe with, but even then it makes sense within like the narrative of the band. This is an online band. That is where their success has come from. And it's also why this album is number 10 on the list and it didn't get any higher. When I think of these songs, I think of the rollout and the music videos and everything that kind of came before and made this album a kind of completion of an arc. Basically, its existence as an album is almost secondary to the experience of following the band. That's not a judgment call on the music. This is one of my favorite bands of all time. It's just that my experience with listening to the music is slightly different than the other albums here, so I don't necessarily have the same emotional attachment, even though I have a lot of appreciation for this album. That emotional attachment is really for the music videos, more than it is the album. Number 9 on the list is Shouted, Written Down, and Quoted by Greensky Bluegrass. Through kind of a roundabout process, Greensky is actually what got me into the genre of bluegrass because of their cover of Pink Floyd's Time. But it actually took until this album came out that I really sat down and was like, Greensky Bluegrass is my favorite bluegrass band. I just feel like Written Shouted is such a good distillation of a lot of their best traits as a band. They've got kind of this more rocks, rootsy feel, and they've got a great electric guitar that comes in and out of these songs. But they also just have this kind of timeless quality to the music. Very rich and textured, and the lyrics are often very clever with some wordplay thrown in. The themes of this album are about looking back with fondness, regret, nostalgia, all the complicated emotions that come with looking back, which also plays into the band's timeless feel. I think the strongest part of this album comes kind of in the middle with a great doubleheader of the songs Run or Die and Room Without a Roof. I feel like the song Take Cover is kind of a weird closer for the album, but even then I think it's a pretty strong song. And Shouted, Written Down came out in 2016, which you will see as the series goes on was for whatever reason, a pretty important time for my musical tastes. Now on to the 8th album on our list, At Folsom Prison by Johnny Cash. I have absolutely loved Johnny Cash since my granddad introduced me to him. I grew up in Tennessee, so I had always been hearing Johnny Cash songs. At Folsom Prison is played at every Titans game. Ring to Fire is a Stone Cold classic, so of course I heard that. But it wasn't until my granddad that I started kind of digging into his catalog. But because of the era, there wasn't a lot of identity to his albums. This would of course change over his career, especially near the end of his life. However, this does kind of make At Folsom Prison stand out as a very identity-driven album. Johnny Cash was kind of hitting a lull in his career for a lot of different reasons at this point. He needed something to shake things up and draw attention back to him, as well as just kind of give him a creative boost. And so he came up with the idea of doing a live album. Not novel, but what was novel was the location. Folsom Prison, the setting for one of his biggest hits. Aesthetically, this makes a lot of sense. It has the connection to that one song, but also Johnny Cash just did a lot of outlaw country music. But it making sense is not the same as it being obvious. And so Johnny Cash headed out with the Tennessee Three and the Carter family, performed, and the album was a big success. He even did a follow-up prison album live at San Quentin. Now that's all narrativization, which plays a part in why I like the album, but doesn't really land on why I do. The reason I bring it up is because that context plays into the execution of the album. They were very interested in building this narrative of Johnny Cash, the king of outlaw music, singing in a prison. Obviously, whenever you make a live album, you have to choose what you keep and what you cut, and that in and of itself kind of creates a narrative. However, the producers also were fine moving things around. The prisoners were obviously hesitant about giving big reactions to any part of a song where Johnny Cash described a crime. However, the producers wanted that, so they would take more raucous reactions from other songs or other points in the recording and put them into whenever Johnny Cash says something like, "I shot a man in Reno." The other big part of the narrativization is the banter that they keep in, which is essential to the album working, because this mixes together all types of music. It mixes together the outlaw songs with more slow ballads, with some religious songs, with some weird comedy tracks. But the thing that ties it all together is Johnny Cash and the rapport he builds up with the prisoners. Of course, you can't tell how much of that is real and how much of that is manufactured. And so the album kind of cuts this very interesting line between reality and product. And I will admit, it all works for me, especially the parts where Cash leans into kind of his dark sense of humor, like on the song 25 Minutes to Go, which counts down a man on death row waiting to hang. Now, I will admit, in some of these songs, as well as a lot of outlaw country, there can be a fair amount of misogyny. Cocaine Blues especially leans into kind of this idea of domestic violence, albeit brought on by cocaine, but tackles those ideas a little flippantly. Anyway, the narrative built around the album, Cash's performance and charisma, along with the energy of the room, create for a really fun listening experience and a lot of definitive versions of these songs. As previously mentioned, 25 Minutes to Go, I think, falls into this, but also the Green Green Grass of Home and At Folsom Prison. If you're going to only listen to one version of those songs, it should be the ones from this album. Now let's jump forward to 2017 to talk about our 7th album, Damn by Kendrick Lamar. Damn was Lamar's 4th studio album and a follow-up to his heavily lauded album To Pimp a Butterfly. And it carries over a lot of ideas and themes from To Pimp a Butterfly, but changes around the mood. To Pimp a Butterfly, while having a lot of dark moments, is ultimately a very hopeful album. Damn isn't. Damn is about damnation. It's much angrier and nasty feeling and focuses piece by piece about this idea of the world as this damned place. It starts with some spoken word poetry, which carries over a motif from To Pimp a Butterfly, but ends with the character representing Kendrick getting killed. And then throughout the rest of the album, you have themes of both religion and kind of this religious separation alongside these competing facets of humanity that are damning us. So you have pride and humility with the songs Pride and Humble, and you have love and lust with the songs Love and Lust. But you can never really trust the narrator. A lot of these songs are told from an unreliable and oftentimes contradictory place. And part of that is because while it is breaking down these ideas of the pieces of damnation, it's also breaking down the different aspects of Kendrick Lamar. You hear different names for him: Kung Fu Kenny, K-Dot, Kendrick. You hear people reaching out to him because they think he's anointed. You hear him proclaiming himself this this larger than life figure within the genre. And then you see the just kind of more depraved moments that he's deciding to share with you. And all these kind of come together to show this very complicated person. And at the time, all these kind of conflicting feelings felt very right for the moment. This was right after the 2016 election. There was a lot of political divide. I mean, there still is, but it was hitting pretty hard. And this is something that Kendrick raps about on the album. So it's certainly not a prescriptive album that you should listen to and be like, this is exactly what I should be thinking about right now, but it was a descriptive album. It was able to capture what a lot of people were feeling at the time. And even still, despite all of the darkness and anger that runs throughout the album, the last song on it is a story about human connection. Human connection that is still rooted in all the themes and ideas of the album, but human connection. And so it gives you that glimmer of hope that was carrying through to Pimp a Butterfly, and I think that would blossom within Mr. Morale. But I can't start talking about that because that's a different album and very divisive, so let's move on. And we're going to move on to a completely different album, The Stranger by Billy Joel. Something that I'm really drawn to in albums is themes and conceits, concepts. The Stranger doesn't have those. It's just vibes, and the vibes are immaculate. 9 songs on this album, at least 4 would be in a Billy Joel top 10. This is all hits, some extremely sing-alongable songs. Vienna, She's Always a Woman, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, which anchors the entire album. And of course, the title track, The Stranger, which is largely ominous with this character of the stranger who is this presence throughout all relationships you have, but is a necessity. It's kind of this very dark idea of you need the conflict in a relationship to make it grow. And the music definitely matches that. Ominous, somber, romantic, fun. This album just kind of bounces around everything, but has this tonal mastery to it all. Even the weakest part of the album, in my opinion, Everybody's Got a Dream, the final song, is still good, and it doesn't make for a weak ending because the last 2 minutes are just a reprise of The Stranger. This is a great album. I don't know what to say. It's fantastic. I love Billy Joel. And now as we enter our top 5, we're going to look at the most recent album on our list, Run the Jewels 4 by Run the Jewels. We're going to be talking about a couple albums from this decade during this series. However, it's kind of harder for these albums to get onto the list because they're newer. I don't have as much of a history with them. They haven't had as much time to leave an impact or kind of show how they affect the legacy of an artist. So you have to know that if it does get on the list, it's pretty good. Run the Jewels 4 is, once again, a very angry album, which I'm going to have a lot of. I like angry music. Run the Jewels 4 starts off just with this abrasive punch to the face and just kind of keeps going. A lot of different tones that you get on here. There's some dark humor. However, as the album progresses, you get more raw and more honest discussions of political violence. There's this, especially a running motif of dying to political violence and kind of the threat of that, but always the defiance to it. The framing of this album is this TV show called The Yankee and the Brave about these 2 criminals who are on the run from some cops, and they kind of use that to contextualize the rest of the discussions here, and there are a lot. Run the Jewels is a very political group. They talk about economics, they talk about police brutality, and they pack so much into their lyrics that you are sure to miss stuff on the first, second, and even the 5th listen. This is such a textually rich album that I feel like I learn a new facet of it every time I listen to it. And once you get to the song Goonies vs. E.T., the entire album is all killer, no filler. It just goes extremely hard until an explosive ending. And this is a rap duo. It is Killer Mike and LP, and you can feel their friendship in the album and just a great chemistry in how they pass off the verses to each other. Like Damn, this was also an album that matched the political moment coming out in 2020. However, Damn kind of had some time to react and directly talk about things in the album. This was something that was recorded before the George Floyd protests of that summer. However, the lyrics match on pretty directly, which is a very sobering reminder that what we were fighting for then, what we continue to fight for today, is not a new fight. But that's the whole point of the album, is that you keep fighting. No matter what, you're going to keep going. Yankee and the Brave are still going to be on the run by the end of the episode or by the end of the album. And now we get to our 4 and 3 slots. In the last video, I talked about how there were 2 Pink Floyd albums that I just couldn't decide. And my decision might change. You might come back each video and see that these 2 albums have flipped spots. It's going to be an ongoing discussion here, but I had to make a choice. And so, number 4 is Animals by Pink Floyd. This is, say it with me now, a very angry album. Inspired by Animal Farm, Animals has a very dystopian view of industrialization, capitalism, the music industry, all pinned through Roger Waters. There are a lot of testing grounds here for what he would flesh out in The Wall. And it's an album with only 5 songs on it. Pigs on the Wing, which has part 1 at the beginning, part 2 at the end, so bookending it. And then you have Dogs, Pigs of Three Kind, and Sheep. Each focuses on a part of society and represents it as an animal. The middle 3 songs are these very long operatic pieces of music. For most of it, it's very fatalistic, especially with the character of the dog, who is complicit in the schemes of the pigs, who are kind of like the heads of society. However, despite their scheming with the pigs, they are ultimately brought down by the sins that they have committed. And then, of course, you have the question at the end with the sheep. Even if the sheep rise up, will they even be better than the pigs? Which is, of course, directly tied to Animal Farm, the pigs becoming more and more like men throughout that book. However, the last song on it, Pigs on the Wing Part 2, kind of does a similar thing to Damn, where it focuses more on personal connection. It repeats a lot of the same lines from Pigs on the Wing Part 1, however, flips them around, where Pigs on the Wing 1 is kind of about the separation between 2 people. This is about the connection of 2 people. And if there is going to be any salvation in this dark world that Animals has created, it is going to be through that connection. And I like all this thematic stuff. It's great. I'm talking about it here because I like it. However, as a Pink Floyd fan, I have to acknowledge that all of Roger Waters' pretty cool ideas and lyrics that he puts into his album are only good because there was also a very strong musical foundation brought on by the other members of Pink Floyd, especially David Gilmour. And you have that here. There are times when the electrical guitar almost feels kind of hesitant, like it kind of begins to represent kind of this hesitancy towards the industrialization. But every other part of the music is also very well thought out. I especially really love the drums on Dogs. And Pink Floyd has always primarily been an atmospheric type band for me. So even before I dive into the lyrics and stuff, I am focusing and relishing in this just very rich musical world they create, which we can keep talking about as we talk about the 3rd album on our list. That was 4. This is 3. Wish You Were Here. This is another 5-song album, and it has some themes that would carry over into Animals, just like Animals would have themes that would carry over into The Wall. But it feels much more personal, much more specific here. And of course, that's because this is a tribute to one of the founding members of Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett, who would go on to kind of lose himself and have to leave the band. Definitely kind of create this kind of specter over the band that they deal with here, most specifically with Shine On Crazy Diamond, Part 1 and Part 2. But even with these kind of ideas of loss of self and the music industry kind of chewing you up like a machine and spitting you out, there is still a transcendence to it all, almost an escape from it. And the acoustic part of Wish You Were Here, which is one of my favorite songs. I used to use it for my intro back in like 2013 when I made YouTube videos. All those videos are hopefully scrubbed from the internet. I think that as the centerpiece does a really good job of making this hopeful and transcendent album. I like angry albums, but I also like albums that can transcend you to a higher point than that anger. And let's start heading towards the end of this list with number 2, Haze by Nataly Dawn. Nataly Dawn's second appearance on the list after season 2. However, this is one of her solo albums and a lot less playful and fun than season 2 was. Haze is such a deeply, profoundly, pleasantly sad album. Haze is an album about disconnection of relationships, both romantic, parental, disconnections between an artist and her art, and a spiritual disconnection that carries through, and was kind of very moving and helpful to me at a time when I was kind of beginning to think more and more about the elements of religion that I grew up with that were not working, that were contradicting the values that I was taught with the actions of the people who taught me. And this album, especially the song Call Your Love, which I think is kind of the thematic anchor of the album, really spoke to me, both when the album came out, but also at different points of my life since then. That song especially, Call Your Love, is a song I wish could go on forever every time I listen to it. While Wish You Were Here and Animals are music first type listens for me, Haze is very much a lyric first listen with a lot of lines that have spoken to me throughout various stages of my life since the album came out. However, that's also not to discount the music here. I think that it keeps a very simplistic grace to everything, and I especially love whenever strings are integrated into the songs. I just think it's so profoundly beautiful. There's an emotional connection that I have with Haze that I have with very few albums, which is why it's made it so high on the list. It also came out in 2016, so we are continuing that kind of trend of 2016 albums, which we will also do with our number one pick, Zastera by Driftless Pony Club. Driftless Pony Club is another band that I discovered on YouTube. Craig Benzine, aka Wheezy Waiter, is the frontman of the band. Even though they have not released any music since. They talked about it in 2020. They said they were working on stuff, but we haven't heard anything since. I really hope that they have a new album coming sooner rather than later. But even if that wasn't the case, and Zastera ended up being their last album, I'd be fine with that because it feels like a magnum opus. It is a size and a scale that is a step up from everything they had done before and just creates for a very fun listening experience. There is a concept behind this album about a girl seeing a sea monster and kind of this whole narrative there. However, I don't really need to get into it because it's not that important to the album. It's important in the sense that it helps flesh out the aesthetics and the themes, but Driftless Pony Club always likes to be a little coy with what they're singing about. There isn't any specific key to understanding this. You just kind of have to go along with the vibe here. There are global ideas here with ideas of climate change and the prehistoric past, the sea monster being just one aspect of a much larger planet that we have lost, but we can still believe in, and how you can kind of see the future from the past and the past from the future, kind of this time dilation that especially plays out in three key songs here that kind of create a trilogy. I Need a Theory, I Need a Moment, and I Need a Mirror, each which kind of presents this different need at the time and calls into question the needs that came before. And all of it is carried through with just this great music. It starts with my favorite album opener of all time, The Chorus Complains. It has this wonderful distorted opening that then drops in with the drums and the bass and just kind of gets your heart pumping. And from that point, each of the songs fall into each other, kind of like dominoes, until you get to that last song, Sea Monster, which then starts to repeat motifs from each of the songs on the album and just ends in this beautiful climax that makes me want to immediately go back and start re-listening to the album. It has a DIY feel that is both haphazard and calculated, and it is an album that isn't about technical skill or beauty, just kind of this raw push, this raw momentum. It is an album that you chant along to, not sing along to. I'll stop there because I'm sure that I will keep going back to this album and talking about it throughout this series, because while with these 10, I have created a list that I think can be challenged, and I think there will be things that will be rearranged and knocked off the list and replaced with others. I think these top songs are going to be very hard to do that to. They're going to be very competitive, which is good because I want a gauntlet for new songs to go up against. We're looking for the best of the best here, or at least the favorites of my favorites here. We will be coming back in the next video. It will be a lot shorter than this. This will probably be the longest video in this series, but I had to start with that strong foundation. So in this next video, I'm going to listen to 3, maybe 4 albums that do something different from what we've seen before, different ideas, themes, genres, time periods, musicians, just different stuff so we can get a little bit more variety to the list. And if you have any recommendations, things that you think I'd enjoy, or just things that you think should be considered, even if not making it on the list, just to be listened to, then please put those suggestions and recommendations down in the comments below. And with that, I will leave you until the next video. So, see you later.